This video is looking at the poem The Man with Night Sweats by Thomas Gunn. So this presupposes that you've read the poem and that you've got maybe a copy of it in front of you and you can make some notes alongside this video. Okay, now first of all, don't be put off by all of the annotation there. That's just what we're going to work through. So for any poem, be it kind of a scene poem that you're studying or an unseen poem, I would look at the title to start off with, just as a way of establishing what the poet, what expectations the poet is setting up for you, and whether or not those expectations are being confirmed or subverted, so kind of challenged or turned on their head in the poem. So here we have the kind of title, The Man with Night Sweats, and we can see straight away that this is something that's relating, kind of put up here, just in that top right-hand corner. Night sweats have got those connotations of nightmarish, kind of feverish terror. Now, as we come to read the poem, we realise that the night sweats are a symptom of the man's illness, but it immediately establishes a sense of fear, which encompasses both the idea of his reaction to the disease and the idea of nightmares. There's also the connotations of night there. This is a time when, there's darkness, there's uncertainty. It encapsulates, it kind of absolutely grasps, encapsulates our worst nightmares. We then come to the idea that this man is anonymous. We're going to hear from him and about his suffering and his fears and his past, but he's not named. Okay, so he becomes, in his anonymity, he becomes a kind of universal symbol. This is an experience that, people, he stands for people who have suffered from the disease of AIDS. By extension, he stands for people who have suffered an illness. And I suppose you can ultimately extrapolate, you can ultimately kind of move it through, progress it out, that he in fact stands for people generally, because we are all on this pathway of sadly inevitable and imminent deterioration until death, which is a cheery thought. So immediately, the man with night sweats, you've got those ideas of kind of fear and inevitability. You've also potentially got the idea that he now considers himself as being defined by his illness. He's not a name, he's not the sum of all he is. He's now the man with night sweats. And if you know anything about the context of this poem, so just flicking up here, you'll know that it was written by Tom Gunn in 1992, that it was written as a reaction to a loss of many of his friends from AIDS. So 1992, early 90s, you really have got that kind of sad kind of explosion in the AIDS epidemic, and a lot of people being lost to that disease before it could be effectively managed by drugs. So you've kind of got the idea that he's now defined by something other than his identity. And night sweats for AIDS sufferers are very much the kind of beginning of that very kind of symptomatic decline into the terminal illness. So we start using the first person, okay, and it's always worthwhile looking at the use of pronouns in a poem. So we start with I. This is a dramatic monologue. We're hearing from this person directly. So you get a sense of the kind of self-talking. It's a personal experience. And that repetition of the I in the first line, I wake up cold, I who prospered, gives a sense of kind of personal involvement, obviously, but also of disbelief. The fact that he's linking this to this awful experience. This is his experience. So we have, I wake up cold, I who prospered through dreams of heat wake to their residue. And it's worth taking a moment to just really look at all of that, because we've got here in this blue note the literal and metaphorical implications of that waking up. On one level, he's a man who's woken up in the morning after a night of kind of feverish sleep, and he wakes up cold, so all the sweating that has taken place during the night has left him chilled as that evaporates. But also the idea that waking up cold into cold reality, I wake up into the reality of my situation. And you have that caesura after cold that I've just kind of, I would say, gives you that pause, that reflection on this reality. And he moves from his situation now to his situation previously. And again, you have this kind of literal and metaphorical idea. I who prospered through dreams of heat wake to their residue. So you have on one literal level that he has been dreaming, he's been hot in his dreams, he's been okay while he's been asleep, maybe not the prospering so much as he has been in that kind of lack of awareness or oblivion. And then he wakes to the dream's residue, and in the literal sense he wakes to what's left over, the idea that the sheets are damp, he's cold, the kind of remnants of his sweat. But metaphorically, he prospered through dreams of heat. He prospered through his passion and desire. He prospered through his love affairs, through his relationships. We know that AIDS is in one way kind of a sexually transmitted disease. So you've got this whole idea running through the poem of his past life being one of passion and his present life being one of illness. So he had prospered, he had thrived, he had done well. To prosper isn't just to exist, it's to thrive through dreams of heat. And you pick up the kind of idea of luxuriance, maybe. Luxuriance, there we go, no spare I. Through the assonance there, the E noise. The residue, of course, metaphorically, is the consequences of the illness, and in some ways the consequences of his relationship, how he contracted AIDS, and as well as the evidence of the wet sheets. So I wake to their residue, sweat and a clinging sheet. Now going to look, just if we follow that line all the way down to the bottom, it does about the personification of the sheets. That metaphor, that clinging, is almost a kind of mockery of the relationships he did have. Physically clinging onto somebody has now given way to a sheet kind of that's clinging to him. And you can see here just in the green, picking up some of the form and structure points. Now, if we go into this bit here, it's the rhyme scheme of this A, B, A, B, C, C. So you have this quatrain, this four lined stanza, and then it goes into a couplet, which is the 2 lines. And the full rhyme there, who, residue, heat, sheet, and then the shield healed, gives maybe this sense of control or connection. Maybe he's trying to impose some sort of discipline on his experience. It's certainly linking the ideas through rhyme. And I think if you take who and residue, it's like who is he, what's left, and heat and sheet reminds you of the kind of passion of the bed, and now the state of the bed, now he's in it alone. It may be him trying to control his reaction to this awful awakening, both literally and metaphorically. Is he trying to be more objective? You've also got the enjambment. Here it speeds up, so that's this kind of black note at the top. It speeds up on who and heat before kind of that end stop, that pause at the end of this line, and then the end stop there, to really kind of have him reflecting on the reality of his situation. I who prospered through dreams of heat wake to their residue. Okay, so that kind of heady, what he refers to as kind of, the kind of risk, the reckless behaviour, then being abruptly stopped is shown through the form. He then moves on to this couplet, signifying his previous independence. He was self-contained. My flesh was its own shield. The kind of idea that I suppose if you're looking at it, he relied on his feelings of maybe youthful immortality. He looked good. His body was attractive. That in itself was enough. He didn't believe anything could happen to harm him. You also, and I think I've done a note on it on the next page, the idea of a shield also picks up on sexual protection. This line very much intimates that he'd been having unprotected sex. He didn't need a shield. He didn't need a condom. It was enough for him to make his own decisions. His own physical strength was going to protect him, because outwardly he could see that where it was gashed, it healed. He had the evidence in front of him that if there was a physical problem, he healed. What could possibly go wrong? He was in good health. And again, the full rhyme here between shield and healed links those connections, gives you that idea of his feeling of his previous invincibility. He then looks back, sort of this retrospective quatrain. I grew as I explored the body I could trust, even while I adored the risk that made robust a world of wonders in each challenge to the skin. He's got this idea of exploration, both of his, I suppose, his lifestyle and his body, kind of made evident by that line break there, because obviously we have the enjambment that means we read it, I grew as I explored the body I could trust. Okay, so he grew both, physically and emotionally, and he used his body, in which he had complete trust, in order to explore these feelings, explore behaviours, explore life. But the idea of I grew as I explored, so the kind of line break there means, I explored and I explored my body. You get that additional meaning through the line break kind of coming together there. So I grew as I explored the body I could trust, even while I adored the risk that made robust a world of wonders. He's distinguishing his mind from his body, and there's a sense of kind of implicit betrayal there. I could trust my body. I can no longer trust my body. The kind of implication of what's happened now. This is a poem that very much juxtaposes, I've got this note up here, the juxtaposition of the past and the present. And I suppose the thing that is sadly missing is, a lot of his comment, or his positive comment, there's no positive kind of thinking of the future. The future is the avalanche of the final couplet. So we have, the explored and adored link that rhyme together, those kind of feelings of adventure, feelings of exploration, and the love he had for that lifestyle, that kind of coming of age, the self-exploration. And trust and robust are also linked. He had complete faith in his invincibility, and he adored the risk. So this life on the edge, the enjambment, creates the pace of that excitement as we go through it. Again, you get the idea of the body I could trust. Implies that, there is this idea that he could trust himself. And ironically, just that note there, he's been betrayed by his body contracting AIDS, but he's also potentially been betrayed by somebody he trusted who maybe didn't realise, or maybe did realise, that they may have the disease. So we then move into a world of wonders. So it made, even while I adored the risk that made robust a world of wonders in each challenge to the skin. So the idea of that alliteration there, almost onomatopoeically, giving you that kind of gasping sound, creating that sense of awe. And there's a challenge to the skin. Every single experience, every single kind of new adventure he went through. And then he kind of reflects on what happened with, I cannot be sorry the given shield was cracked. My mind reduced to hurry, my flesh reduced and wrecked. And you get this kind of reflection on what happened. And again, that image of the shield, his body, we know from earlier on in the poem, is the shield. We also know there's that maybe implicit reference to his, protection, what happened to allow him to get the disease. And he says, he has to be sorry that the given shield was cracked. The idea that it was given, this kind of beautiful exterior, beautiful physicality that's been given to him, but it's now been broken. Maybe there's also the idea of the protection he was using, letting him down. But whatever's happened, it's been cracked. And you have the onomatopoeia of cracked, that harsh K sound, to emphasize the break, the kind of massive change. And it kind of there's that half rhyme there on wrecked, and again the kind of consonance of the k sound, the K, the kind of harshness. The half rhyme shows the breaking down of and lack of connection, the idea of things starting to come apart slightly. And we look at the consequences, and there's this anaphora there, or anaphora, depending on how you want to pronounce it, that looks at both his psychological reduction and his physical reduction. All of a sudden, he's talking about his whole being, but he's talking about the kind of deterioration, the destruction of it. And then that quatrain brings us into the next couplet, and the form changes here. We've had quatrain to couplet, quatrain to couplet, quatrain, and then we get... So if you look here, there's this idea of compulsion and obligation. His new life is one of duty rather than risk. I have to change the bed. These are the consequences. This is the residue. So I have to change the bed, but catch myself instead, stop and reflect. So, things like this troche on the second line, prospered through. You have that kind of 3-syllable unit where it's disturbing that iambic rhythm. I would look at the use of I in there. Obviously, with this being a dramatic monologue in the first person, the focus is on his feelings, his thoughts, but also maybe connect that to the sort of disassociation and then coming back together of his feelings about his body and himself. There seems to be a distinction drawn in his mind. He's used, quite for a modern, if we just go on to the next one, quatrain, couplet. Stopped upright where I am, hugging my body to me as if to shield it from the pains that will go through me. So that couplet leads into kind of, a moment where he is alone, he is trying to comfort himself. Again, that implicit contrast of the dreams of heat that he's experienced in the past. He's again separating out this difference between his self and his body. We have the idea of stopping. This is a poem that is talking about the inexorable progression towards death as a consequence of a disease. It is about premature ending. It's about lost potential. He finds himself stopped standing, both emotionally and physically. And the idea of where, I am an assertion of existence. I'm hugging my body to me. And that idea of hugging my body to me, what is the me if you're hugging your body? How much more kind of me can you get? It's kind of almost paradoxical. It's kind of confusing that, what is the essence of himself? And it's almost as if that's picked up in the idea of the rhyme, because there's a full rhyme where he rhymes me with me. He's the only thing he's got. He's the only thing he's got to rely on. There's that isolation in this deeply personal experience, because he is the only thing that can now shield his body from the pains, not just one, but plural, that will go through me. So this inevitability of his suffering. And again, there's this recurring reference to shield. The shield, his body was his shield. The shield has let him down, be what it may, be it a body, be it protection. and now he is trying to shield himself. So you've got the evolution of that metaphor through the poem. What now is his shield? And he tries to shield himself as if his hands were enough to hold an avalanche off. So again, there's that kind of idea of this unstoppability and inevitability of this natural phenomenon. It's an external force. He's been, he's going to be swept away or overcome by it. This is the kind of metaphor that he's using for the progression of his disease. And again, the kind of half rhyme there, is a feeling of disjointedness, uncertainty. So looking at the idea of the ideas and images in this poem, we've got the kind of juxtaposition of the past, present, and the question mark, or kind of sadly lack of question mark almost over the future. The remembrance that, his past was daring, he was strong, he was the kind of epitome of masculinity, if you like, compared with what he is today, compared with his consideration of what he'll be tomorrow. You've got the idea of the shield throughout, I think, really important metaphor to track the kind of evolution, the change and development of that metaphor. Looking at the form and structure of the poem, I would make sure that you're commenting on the end stopping and enjambment. I mean, if you look here, we've now got kind of an awful lot of enjambment. Again, giving that sense of pace, giving that idea of inevitable and unstoppable force that's mirroring the content really there. The idea, I suppose, of finality, the idea that, if you like, this one act sealed his fate and now everything else is preordained, everything else is kind of foretold. You've got a rhyme scheme which kind of starts with a strict kind of full rhyme pattern, and then moves into the use of half rhymes to show deterioration and kind of progression of illness and breaking down. You've got this kind of form change from the couplet to the quatrain halfway through, kind of maybe an unsteadiness and instability from his viewpoint and his life. And the meter is largely iambic trimeter. So you've got this kind of 6-syllable line, but there is some variation to that. So if you take the kind of regular trimeter, the 6-syllable iambic line, there's a kind of pace to it, there's a rhythm, there's a march to an inevitability of decline. But the variations in it give that emotion, give that kind of idea of effect. He's used quite a kind of classical form, it is in a kind of recognised metre. There is a rhyme scheme. It's not in free verse. There is a lot written, I think, in various essays to analyse this poem online about his influences and Gunn's influences being more traditional. If you have to do a context section on your exam, maybe look that up slightly more. I hope this has helped. It's just my musings on the poem. I would make sure, if you're making notes with an exam in mind, that you really are looking at these form and structure points, because in all kind of examinations that are dealing with poetry, it really is the kind of differentiator between candidates. So what marks the difference between the really top level candidates and the kind of good candidates is how comfortable they are in connecting the language to the form and structure. You're never going to just point out the metre or point out a full rhyme or point out enjambment or end stop. You're always going to connect it to the effect. How does it link with what's going on in the poem? Okay, hope this helps. Bye now.